The idea behind the high school equivalency diploma is that you are equipped with the tools that you need in order to be successful in life and in further education. So the HiSET asks questions that are supposed to test whether you'll understand kind of the reasoning behind science and the way science works more than just a lot of facts about science. So here's an example of a question from a HiSET practice test. It says, Lynn measured her pulse before she ate lunch and determined her heart rate to be 72 beats per minute. Immediately after lunch, her rate was 75 beats per minute. How does Lynn's observation relate to the idea that heart rates will increase after eating? So, we're going to answer this question in a second, but first I want to break down for you the different parts of this question and what each part means. So, first of all, there's a hypothesis. So there's an idea, and the idea isn't necessarily the first thing that's mentioned in this, but think for a moment, what is the underlying idea that drove Lynn to check her heart rate? It's the idea that a heart rate will increase after eating. That's something that's called a hypothesis. People form hypotheses or educated guesses about what they think will happen. It's formed by observation, and it's the driving question behind the experiment. So a hypothesis is basically saying, what do you think will happen? In this case, Lynn thinks that if she eats, then her heart rate will increase, and that is her hypothesis. Oftentimes you'll see hypotheses written as if-then statements. If this happens, then that will happen. In this case, if Lynn eats, then heart rate will increase. So the next part of this is that she actually tried it out. This is what we'll call an experiment. An experiment is when you put a hypothesis to the test. And so you take that idea, that if-then statement, and then you test it out to see if it's true. In this case, Lynn measured her pulse before she ate lunch, and then she ate, and then she measured it again. So she's testing to see if there's an increase. The next part is the conclusions. So what can Lynn reliably learn from this experiment? What does it know? What does it show her? What does she know based on it? So each experiment or each scientific study is going to have these three parts: hypothesis, experiment, and conclusions. Here's the really important part, is that a conclusion always in science is kind of still a guess. Because no matter how thorough your experiments are, you can never definitively prove or disprove something. But what you have done in the experiment may support the hypothesis that you started with. So let's think about Lynn for a second. It says that her heart rate did increase. In this particular case, it did increase from 72 beats per minute to 75 beats per minute. So that certainly does not disprove that hypothesis that if she eats it will increase her heart rate. But does it prove it? The answer is no. It doesn't prove it. It actually would just support it. The answer here is going to be C, because the idea that she has an increased heart rate is supported by the fact that her heart rate did increase in this case. But we would need a lot more study to know for sure that that's true. Just one person is not enough to verify it, but it definitely does support the hypothesis. So let's take a bigger look at an experiment and talk a little bit about some more examples from the HiSET. An experiment has three parts: background, method, and results. The background is asking, what do we need to know? Basically, what do we need to know before we start? Is there any basic information that's going to help us approach this experiment wisely? The second is the method. The method is, what do we need to do? So if I'm going to do an experiment, what do I need to do to test out my hypothesis? In Lynn's case, it was measuring her heart rate, eating, and then measuring it again. That's the method. It's the process that she used to actually see if her hypothesis was supported. And then the results are the what happened, and the results are data. Oftentimes, data is presented in charts and graphs because charts and graphs are an easy way to demonstrate what we've learned. So oftentimes when you see the charts and graphs, that's the data. Those are the results of the experiment. What actually happened? And then we use those results to form some conclusions. So you start with a hypothesis. From the hypothesis, there's an experiment, which starts with the background, what do you need to know, the method, how you're going to do it, and then the results, what happened. And then that leads to the conclusions of what do we know now? Is the hypothesis supported or is the hypothesis not supported? And now what further questions do we have that we might want to explore using this same process? This process is called the scientific process. So let's see how this applies to a question on the HiSET.